You are listening to WCAT Radio, your station for quality Catholic programming. Your selected program will begin right after a word from our sponsor, GroupM7.com, a web design and hosting company. Log on to GroupM7.com today and let them know that WCAT Radio sent you.
You know, my finest childhood memories was the Saturday morning movies for about 4 bits each. My brother and I could split a Coke and a big box of popcorn and watch movies about Tarzan, Jane, and their Amazon River adventures. Well, maybe that's where Jeff Bezos took his name. His Amazon.com is now the largest online retailer in the world. I'm Michael Malfood with Group M7, the oldest and largest website design firm in East Texas, and here's my point, and as usual, it's a good one. If your website is modern and up-to-date, mobile and search engine friendly, it matters not whether you sell a product or provide information about your goods and services, your sales justifiably will increase just like theirs. The world uses the internet. We can improve your website and your email. Look at our giant portfolio at GroupM7.com. Since 1995, there's only one web and there's only one group, and it's us. It's Group M7.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos-Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos-Reyes and Christopher Zehnder. Today we discuss political provocations. We'll tell you why we're provoked and what we think. And don't hesitate in the days to come when we post our comments to comment on the comments. We begin, though, in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation through Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, I'd like to begin the provoking with a bit of a trip down memory lane. For many, many years, I taught with a fellow named Robert H. Taylor, S.J. And I remember well when we went together, because we shared an office, to the second departmental meeting of the year. He told me, "Don't say anything stupid this time." Well, right away, I knew he was a realist. And later, he went on to observe, after an election, we pretty much get the political leaders we deserve. And he said a lot of things to me over the years, but I certainly have recalled on many an occasion his comment, we pretty much get the political leaders we deserve. Now, if that's true, shouldn't we blame ourselves instead of everybody else? Shouldn't we blame ourselves instead of our political leaders? Shouldn't we blame ourselves more than we do. On the other hand, suppose it's false, and we get political leaders that we don't deserve. Well, who should we blame then? Or, here's another possibility. Despite appearances, perhaps the reality is that not that much is rotten in Denmark or Kansas or Ohio or even in California. And if there's not that much rotten, well, then we've got some pretty good political leaders and we're pretty good citizens. So there are at least three ways to go with this provocation. And I can tell by looking at Mario Ramos-Reyes that he's provoked, mightily provoked. So I'm going to ask him what his thoughts are.
Well, I think that's an old saying, a cliche to great extent, I think. And perhaps what we need to do about that is first define or explain what is that thing that we really deserve and what type of political system make us to deserve the leader that we elect or we choose. Do we have in mind any specific qualification for a political leader, for becoming a political leader or elect a political leader? Are there any specific virtues that these political leaders should have in order to be elected? And when we do choose political leaders who are not qualified according to the standard, say, well, these people are like us, and they don't deserve to be elected, and don't complain because they are an image of those of us who have elected them. So perhaps we need to define exactly what type of leader we are looking for in a democracy. And I'm not very sure about that definition. And it seems to me that implicit in that cliche is that democracy is, or a democratic process. By that, I mean a process by which we choose our representative every 2 years, every 4 years, must be such that the leaders must be virtuous, quite impeccable. I'm not sure that is qualified a democratic regime. Now, we are not exactly a democratic regime. We also have controls about political power. We have other instruments in the system which make us a republic that can control those who are being elected. So it's more complicated than just choosing our representative. So my first reflection is that are we really thinking that democracy is a kind of salvation for a human community, that we are looking for that perfect leader? Now, if you look back American history, you look back any world history, any democratic system, which, by the way, is newer than we think it is. Let's say 1946, 47. Then we become, at least worldwide, or most of country, constitutional democracies. The United States perhaps was before that already constitutional democracy with all these limitations. But yet you examine those representatives, those, let's say, presidents who were elected, or senators in any country, I think the quality of this leader is not quite a nice picture, so to speak. So my question then again is, what are we really expecting?
All right, Christopher. Mario has raised a question based on a provocation. How would you answer his question?
Well, I tend to think in all forms of government, we can't really expect too much. And I think back to Tocqueville writes about this in Democracy in America, where he says that the representatives of the people in the United States are generally a grade below the people themselves. And one of the reasons that is because in their eagerness for power, they have to debase themselves and try to lure and seduce the people. So they become kind of a corrupting force in that way. They corrupt themselves in order to gain power. I mean, obviously that's not always been the case, but I would say that's a good part of the reality. I've often wondered, and now that I'm in a very humble political office, I still think this, why you really want to be in political office. I mean, I can think of a lot more things that I would like to spend a few Monday nights on than sewer issues and the like. What is it that really motivates you to be in office? I would thought it would be one of the nice things to do if you were in office would be to go in and raise a bit of hell and then just see if you're reelected instead of constantly worried about that reelection. So I think it's right. I think there is. I really wonder to the degree. I guess I agree with Mario here. It seems that is a cliche. We get the leaders we deserve, and for one reason I think it's a cliche is, though I think there is truth in it, but nevertheless it's a cliche because democracy isn't a natural organizing principle of people. You can't just say we have the people and then they're sort of spontaneously going to rise to them good leaders if that's what they want. They have to be offered the good leaders. Generally speaking, the people don't act unless they're led. There have to be people there has to be some organizing people of the mass. Either they have to be organized already in a kind of articulated social order, or they have to be organized by some principle, a leader of some sort, or a party of some sort. If you don't have those leaders, if they don't rise, and you can't a democracy simply can't manufacture them. And if you come to a point in your democracy where money controls the elective process, it's very difficult for most people who are they're occupied in their daily lives with just the very details of daily life to actually do much about it. So in that sense, I would say it's a cliche, and I wonder to what extent it is true.
2 votes for cliche status. Let me ask Mario a couple questions, and then I'll ask Christopher a couple questions. Mario, are there specific virtues that a leader should have? Are there distinctive virtues? I think of a virtue as a strength of character that enables one to realize or at least advance a good, a specific good. And so just as there are distinctive goods, there would be distinctive strengths of character that would help one to realize those goods. When you think of the virtuous leader in the political sphere, do you have any particular virtue that comes to mind?
Again, when we talk about leaders of what? Do I think about a quality of character that a president must have? Do I think that a quality of character that a senator may have or a council member? I think depend on the official you are electing. What are you expecting from a president? And that I think is very important. Now, if you say, what do I expect from a president? Well, honesty. honesty, transparency. Tell us what really is happening and why you take the decision you did. And I think that's a fundamental quality of someone to be respected, at least for me. Does that mean that that quality may give that particular president the strength to guide the country in a particular time? I don't know, but I expect a president to tell me the truth. And that, which means he's responsible about the delegation of power we're given to him. And I expect that also from any legislator. I think that's basic. But again, here in any democracy, what we expect from officials who are elected are at least a minimum of ethical standard, a minimum. In other words, that they hold certain, let's call virtues of transparency, responsibility, hardworking, which are common sense. Now, if on the top of that, we also want something else, I don't think that is reasonable in many instances. And the reason why it's not many instances is because precisely what Christopher is saying. Perhaps many people who are more virtuous or more educated may want to focus on their own world and be successful there instead of dedicating their life to what we may call the common good. Why is that? Well, we can discuss the motivations and so on, and that vary from one type of democracy to another in terms of development. So going back to your question, I think that's the virtues which are the basics. I'm not expecting my president or senator to give me the opportunities to, I don't know, be successful or happy. That's my choice. That's the way that I do things. I want him just to create the atmosphere, and that's it. So don't expect, I don't want to expect from politics what doesn't belong to politics. I don't believe that politics is the table of salvation of anything, much less democracy. It's a good, the best way of governing, probably, given all the rest, but is far from being really the salvation that sometimes we are looking for.
That helps me. Now, I do have, especially the minimalist point that democracy is not the salvation we're looking for. Or maybe it's not minimalist, maybe it's just modest. But I do have a further question, and this further question I want to introduce with an anecdote. The first president that I really paid some attention to, I mean, I was aware of Eisenhower, and I even vaguely remember people talking about Truman. But the first president that I was aware of really was John F. Kennedy. And one of the things that I recall being impressed with, even then at the time, was that he was a speed reader. How do you get to be a quick study? One way is to be a speed reader. And there are a number of articles along that theme. Now, given human frailty, there were evidently virtues that Kennedy didn't have, but he was a quick take, partly because he was a speed reader. Now, suppose we have a leader who has the sorts of virtues you have in mind, among them transparency, and he lets it be known that he really doesn't need sorry, he really doesn't read much. And what he does read, he'd like to have pretty much on the front side of one piece of paper. And so he doesn't need to be a speed reader because he doesn't read much. And not only that, that's pretty transparent admission. Suppose many of his comments are to the effect, and he's very transparent about that, I didn't really get this. Boy, did I ever blow that decision. That was one of the dumber things I ever did, although the competition is fierce. Suppose we have somebody who really doesn't have much in the way of intellectual perspicaciousness. In fact, he's not all that bright. Maybe he's charismatic, but not all that bright. So in addition to what we might call moral virtue, we need some intellectual virtues, that's for sure, which makes me think of the one cardinal virtue, which is at once moral and intellectual, prudence. Could you say a bit about the role of prudence in a good leader, and more generally, the need for intellectual virtues?
Yes, but again, yes, need to be prudent. But my question is, prudence is an intellectual virtue and also a practical virtue, and require in itself a certain practice. Anyone who dedicates his life to politics has some kind of prudence, learning along the way. Does that mean that that person needs to be well read? I'm not sure about that. And the reason what I'm saying is that you can have a lot of examples of intellectuals who have occupied presidencies and were not really prudent and failed their presidencies. And on the other hand, you may have some president who may not have been very well read. And overall, the result of their presidency was fairly or better than others. So I'm not sure about the culture, the learned is better prepared to be a politician. Again, I'm right there. I just give a term. If a leader is a politician, then we need to explain what is a politician. Is there such a thing as vocation for politics that makes someone, again, to exercise prudence because he has this call to be a politician? And so going back to what Christopher was saying, why is that some people are not getting into politics? My inclination is to think because we don't have that vocation to be a politician. We may have a different vocation. And that politician has a specific vocation, perhaps not inclined to read much. But that doesn't mean that that person is not prudent. And that reminds me what Ortega y Gasset, the great Spanish philosopher, always said. There is something in a politician, the pura raza, pure politician, that we cannot learn from books. Now, what are these traits? We can discuss that. In other words, we have the tendency sometimes too much to idealize the politician, and they say, well, need prudent. Yes, to some extent. But again, that is being learned through practice. And the intellectual generally is hesitant to get into the arena of politics, start practicing, because it's a different vocation. So perhaps we need to start asking, why is that people, or most people, are lacking this vocation for politics, this calling for politics?
Things are getting more involved. Let me try to transition to Christopher here. You've been speaking about vocation, distinct vocation of a political leader, but we also have, certainly, the citizens to consider. And when we think about citizens and exercising good citizenship, can we really say that some citizens who are citizens don't have a vocation to be citizens, so they really don't pay much attention unless they've got a lot of free time and unless they're bombarded with calls to their civic duty? Or should we say that maybe we get the leaders, back to this cliche, that we deserve, because as citizens, although we have a vocation as citizens to practice good citizenship, we, in the waning days, that they might be such, in the waning days of capitalism, we're mostly individualists and we mostly don't care. And if there's a vocation to be a citizen, we're going to ignore it. I don't know. Maybe we could say that there is something distinctive and special about the vocation of a good leader. But when it comes to the citizens, the people that Christopher Zehnder is serving, is it really okay for them to say, gosh, good job, I'm busy, I got something else to do?
I don't think it's okay to say that. And that's one of the problems you find in local government, particularly. And I've seen that here. I've seen it in Ohio, in California when I lived there. People don't care about even what's in their interests, and that always strikes me. You think you could at least draw people in to care about what's in their interest. If you can't work them up to the concern for the common good, at least you could say you're going to have to pay higher taxes because of this, or something of that sort. You think that would at least interest them, but it doesn't. And part of it is, I think there are lots of reasons for that. I think one of them is lethargy and the desire when at the end of the workday to just be left alone and to enjoy oneself. I think sometimes some people are that the economic pressures of our time are really heavy on certain people. When you have husband and wife both working, you don't have the peace of the home life oftentimes, and then so when you have the leisure to actually consider any of these things. I think, too, people often just assume, for whatever reason, that the political leaders don't work for their own benefit, and there's really no point in even trying to influence them. And I understand that. I understand that motivation, because when I lived in a town in California, it seemed like at a certain point, it didn't matter what you said. I would go to city council meetings where I would talk, and we would get citizens groups together. It didn't seem to matter. What seemed to matter was only what the developers wanted in a particular area. So, after a while, you begin to think, well, there's really no point in my even being engaged in any of this, because no matter what I do, no matter what I say, no matter what I try to do, nothing happens. And that's twofold. It's in being able to influence, say, a city council or any other public body. It's also in trying to get your local neighbors to care enough about what's actually happening to actually come to a meeting. We were a couple things in the town I lived in. People would say, yes, we're with you on this. We're opposed to this thing. I said, well, please come to the meeting. Did they come? They promised to come, but did they come? No, they didn't come. So so there is, I don't know if there's a vocation to be a citizen, because I think when you're placed within a particular political order, you're just automatically a citizen, and you don't even get to give it up, even if you want to. I guess you give it up by not voting, but it's simply a condition. It's like getting married and saying,
You better be careful, Mr. Zehnder. Tread lightly, my friend.
Yeah. Well,
It's a sad and sorry condition indeed.
Yeah, I mean, is that it's just like saying I'm getting married, but I'm going to spend my nights at the bar. It doesn't work that way. So you're married, that's the condition you're in. And so that's you simply have to exercise the best way you can. And at least that takes at a certain point a commitment to saying, I'm going to do something, that this is my responsibility, instead of just saying, well, I'm not going to bother with it because there's nothing I can do about it. So I guess, yeah, it also depends on the circumstances. In a village like where I live, you could have a lot more clout as a citizen. In some of the larger towns and cities, you're not going to have any clout as a citizen. So there's that aspect of it too. It's fairly complicated.
All right, we live in interesting times and chaotic times, but so did St. Augustine. And St. Augustine wrote the following, and I think for us it constitutes another political provocation. Augustine writes, and St. Thomas went out of his way to cite this passage from Augustine. He writes, if the people have a sense of moderation and responsibility and are most careful guardians of the commonweal, it is right to enact a law allowing such a people to choose their own magistrates. But if, as time goes on, the same people become so corrupt as to sell their votes and entrust the government to scoundrels and criminals, then the right to appoint their public officials is forfeit, and choice should devolve to a few good men. So what should we say about that? We can't say, oh, Augustine, you didn't know the turmoil we know. He would say to us, no, you don't know the turmoil that I know. And we can't say to Augustine, well, you don't care that much about the importance of choice. And he would say to us, blimey, mates, this passage comes from a book that I wrote called On Free Choice. And, well, what are we supposed to say to Augustine?
Well, I think in principle, it seems correct to me. I think it will only be incorrect if we think that democracy in and of itself is a necessary form of government. There have been cases, I think the history of the world, for most of the history of the world, where the common good was better realized by non-democratic means. One might argue there are places in the world, our attempts to go and foist democracy on countries all throughout the world doesn't seem very, very effective. So it may be the cases where more authoritarian governments might be necessary. We might think that'd be ideal, but yet, nevertheless, it might be necessary given the social conditions. If we assume that, if the assumption is that democracy is always right for everyone, that seems to say that there is no cultural preparation for democracy amongst the people, that you can just simply give people this form of government and it'll work. If democracy is not a necessary form of government for every people, then at least in principle, I can see that in certain cases, that for the sake of the common good, under particularly bad regimes, that such an action, which would effectively be a kind of coup d'état or a revolution, would be justified. The problem is, of course, when a society has become so corrupt, how many of those few good men are you going to find, and how are they going to get the power? I think now, if we want to think of our own time as being such a time, what powerful men tend to rise up? Donald Trump. What everyone thinks of Donald Trump, I don't think he's virtuous, one of the virtuous few that St. Augustine would have had in mind. Who else would tend to rise up except those people who are already the plutocratic powers. So I don't know if you would go to some kind of aristocracy of the rule of the best, rather you would end up going to some kind of plutocracy or oligarchy.
So it might be the case that we would have to forego the democratic system for a time. But if we do, we'll be holding our breath trying to find some good men to lead us. That could be because it's so hard to find virtuous leaders, which brings us back to where we were. But maybe Mario can cut this knot for us.
Well, when I read this yesterday, my sensation is that Augustine has a very perfectionist view of politics. He's expecting too much. So if you don't find in the many, you will find in the few. Not quite so. I do believe that let's use this technical term, epistemological foundation of democracy is very sound. But we need to be very careful what we really understand by democracy. Again, we are saying, well, yes, we are going to get, and we need to get these few good people. But there is no what we may call pure democracy. If we choose those people who are not qualified, as we often do, we have other controls to the power of these people, how they exercise when they are in office. In other words, we have the basic, the minimum. And the minimum, I need to be very careful what I said. I'm not saying the baseline, the mediocre. I'm saying at least respect human right, basic human right, which are enshrined in any constitution, the basic. Now, we agree upon that. Whoever is elected and is controlled by the plane of this system is going to work decently. Perfectly? No, but at least with certain stability. Do we need really a few good men in order that system to work? I don't think so. That's why we have check and balances. That's the idea. The idea is that we have created over centuries a political system, let's call it constitutional democracy or liberal democracy, which in itself can control itself. Can we get a better system by going back to a monarch? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. I think here we count with something which is precious to us, and only we'll really realize how precious it is when we lose that, which is freedom. People are complaining today because they feel that their religious freedom is at stake. Yes, that's true. That is how valuable human freedom is. And a monarchy, there are people who are not free or were not free. You can trace back to Franco's system, which is many Catholics praise as the epitome of the common good. Well, you were not free, not even to defend a doctoral dissertation at the university. And I'm saying seriously about that. One of the most important personalists in Spain history, Julian Marias, was rejected. Because what? Because he was not defending atomistic topic in his dissertation. So that's a silly example, but it's an example of how freedom really encouraged. Now, today we are suffering this lack of freedom sometimes in academia. That's true. Well, that reinforced my argument. What is my point? We can feel nostalgic about the lack of a few people who can run things, but I think constitutional democracy, when we control power of people who are there and public opinion and all that, with all the limitation, with the money flowing in and all that, I think is reasonable system, given our own human condition, that we are sinners.
All right. We're going to have a healthy dose of realism, a very healthy, a bracing dose of realism. Christopher has spoken some about Ohio, but he also said something about California. And let me introduce this next provocation by saying something about California. There's a special recall election going on, and the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who is himself a wealthy man, has been for, let's say the last month, sending out an email to anybody who doesn't unsubscribe from his email list, asking for the princely sum of $3. Now, the reason why he's asking for $3 is because he's hoping to say that he has wide-ranging support from perfectly ordinary people. And if somebody says, well, how do we know that? He can say, look at my donor list. And, well, I'm sure that a lot of people have given him $3. But the most interesting contributor to Newsom's campaign has been a fellow named Reed Hastings. And that's not a household name, but, in Los Angeles, it practically is. Mr. Reed Hastings is the CEO of Netflix. And if you're in California, and if you're in Los Angeles, and if you're anybody, you're connected to what we call the biz of what I would call commodified, prepackaged entertainment. And who could be more important in that sphere than the CEO for Netflix? Now, it hasn't gone unnoticed in the media that Newsom has really more money than he can spend in the recall election. And it hasn't gone unnoticed in the media that Reed Hastings, CEO of Netflix, has been his single biggest donor. But now, towards the end of an article in yesterday's paper, Los Angeles Times paper, there's a fellow named Derry Srago, who's a veteran Democratic political strategist, and he says the following. Well, the newspaper writer says the following, broadly citing Srago's comments. He doesn't expect any attacks on Newsom for accepting millions in campaign contributions to be a factor in the recall. It's going to make any difference. He continues. Voters think all politicians do the same thing, including those criticizing Newsom. Now comes a direct quote from this fellow who is the publisher of the California Target Book, A Guide to State Politics. Here's a direct quote. I can state with great certainty that ordinary voters think that they're all crooks. Do they think that the Democrats are worse than the Republicans or that the Republicans are worse? No, they just think everybody in the business is on the take. So, if everybody's on the take and all the voters assume that everybody is on the take, what are we supposed to make of this provoking state of affairs? And it's back to you, Mario.
let me start with
He's taking a deep breath. Good for him. Let it rip.
In a very interesting debate back in 2004, I think 2004, 2003, the then Cardinal Ratzinger debated with one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, an Enlightenment thinker, Jürgen Habermas. And the debate was so interesting that they discussed about what are the conditions of the pre-political foundation of democracy, contemporary democracy, if there is such a thing. Because in the view of Habermas, we can polish, create, make it work, make it more human through dialogue, discussions, debate. That's the richness of democracy, where no one is excluded and we are part of the conversation. Of course, we need to level the field in order to converse, because if you had too much money, of course, your voice will be probably more important than nobody else. So Constitution need to level the field, which is not easy. Now, what is the point or the counterpoint, as I understood, of Ratzinger? Yes, that mechanism is not letting people outside. Of course, we need to include not only those who are well off, everyone. Okay. Now, what is the tradition of the church? That in order to have a good conversation or a good democratic discourse, which generally is normative because it's going to give the rules by which you are playing politics, you need certain preconditions. Pre-political conditions that come before that dialogue. And what are these conditions? Basically moral conditions. It comes from what? Tradition. Now, you can connect this with McIntyre. Now, you may say that tradition is fragmented and so on. Okay. Now, when you read that, it seems to me that the dialogue, let's call that a discussion, debate, really is not a truly democratic debate, because those preconditions are gone. We no longer really have an ethical baseline that can somehow allow us to interact as humans. And so people really are moved by self-interest. The ethos is fragmented. Now, is that a responsibility of democratic system? The answer is yes and no. No, because that comes from a tradition that once upon a time was here, is no longer here. Now, having said that, how then we go about and rebuild that, reconstitute that? That will take time, and the vehicle through which we can rebuild that is not politics. There are other avenues. We are, I think, when you describe in that conundrum, and that's across the board. Latin America is the same. Everything is fragmented. People are trusting in what? Libertarian politics. as if freedom without any nature would save the day. It's not so. So we are at a stage in history, I think, that we need to realize that this ethos is gone already. And we need to do something. Now, going back to the original observation of Christopher, I think was very proper. The reason why many people who seems to have a very good chance at playing or getting into politics, and they are not doing that, it is because many people are looking at other venues or avenues in order to rebuild this culture. And politics is just a game to them. Now, that doesn't, which in some ways is saying, well, I'm just trying to rebuild the cathedral, which is going to be finished 30 years from now, probably. But I see that, yes, it's true. Everything is contaminated. But I don't think democracy as such has the tools to restore that. It come from someplace else. And this is why it's very important, the evangelization and how we approach the evangelization.
Could we say that democracy can't lift itself up by its own bootstraps? What's necessary is a culture that could lead us to the conditions for democracy. And one of the conditions is a more or less level playing field. But of course, we don't have that because everything is determined by money.
Let me interrupt you. Last October, November, I finished a paper for the American Maritime Association, which, you know, was not delivered at the convention because I was not able to travel because the COVID situation. The title of my paper is, Can Democracy Be Saved from Itself? Can democracy be saved from itself? And it's a very long account of what happened at that point at the end of 2019 up to the midst of 2020 in Latin America, in different countries, Venezuela, Peru, Chile, Bolivia. What is the point? It seems that democracy is committing suicide, cannot save itself. And why is that? And so I developed there a few arguments based on the historical data that can give us certain, I hope, certain insight on that particular issue. And I finish with this. One of the prescription of some people to save democracy from collapsing is calling to a new constitutional convention to get a new constitution. I think it's the wrong term. Because again, you are trusting in what? In power. Let's recreate how we organize ourselves, and we will save democracy. And that has been the case for at least 2 or 3 countries.
Mario has been a hyper-realist in these last comments. And I wonder if Christopher wants to say anything at this point. I do have a final provocation, but Mario maybe needs some consolation with regard to the saving of democracy. Christopher, you said that we've tried to impose democracy on places that aren't really cut out for it. Could it be that we're not really cut out for it ourselves? What do you think?
Well, I think people can become so corrupt that their customary constitution doesn't function anymore. And I think we have come to that point. And there's lots of, Mario's perfectly right. There's the ethical, moral, religious aspect of it, which we've lost. There's also the aspect of that any good society has to be, as I like to put it, articulated. It has to, people have, we talk about public debates and things. It's always, I don't think in the best of times, the public debates are always between elites. And they're never between the common everyday fellow in a small town in Ohio. He's not heard. But what he could be heard in a sense if there was a principle of subsidiarity of organization, where his attention is paid mostly to those local concerns, and he identifies himself and gets a certain definition of himself vis-a-vis a smaller group of people. And you build up from those building blocks of local patriotism and local engagement, principles of higher engagement. I think one of the problems most people are asked to decide on questions that they can't possibly even understand. And the world and the nation is too large for people to really decently comprehend what's being said by the elites. So we need to have that kind of return to a kind of subsidiary system. Of course, none of that is going to work, whether it be that or a new constitution. None of it's going to work without a certain moral revival. And so there has to be people dedicated primarily this time. It's more important to be dedicated to, say, the transformation of culture, the transformation of the religious sense, and that type of thing, than it is to be involved in politics. For myself, I serve on a village council because I think I might be able to do some good there. And it doesn't actually take me much from my normal duties, which I think are more important in the village council because they're actually directed towards the revitalization of Catholic education. I would not want to serve, and I will not serve on a higher level. I'm not going to the county level because I think once you start to I think if I got beyond this level, I really couldn't do any good anymore. The powers that are involved in play in those areas, given the cultural presuppositions, the cultural desires of the people, would militate against any real contribution that I could ever make. So I would not even think of going into government at a higher level for that reason.
Now, this subsidiarity you talk about, are there any political parties that take that seriously?
Well, there is one who has a virtuous candidate in California. He has all the virtues that anybody could possibly want, except for his jokes.
Well, now, here's the last provocation. There's this question that's asked plaintively from time to time. What if they gave a war and no one came? How about this? What if there were an election and nobody contributed any money to the candidates? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Now, since we're speaking of money, and since most of the money, as far as I can tell, is spent on ads that are mindless, vicious, divisive in the worst sense of the word. Question is, why does anybody give any money to politicians in the first place? If it's money that makes the wheels go round, and it turns out to be our money, even if it's just $3, why don't we get the leaders we deserve?
Well, I think common people give the $3 because they actually think they actually give they for some reason they want this candidate to win. Oftentimes because the alternative seems worse. So, and the people in the higher level obviously give the money because it gives them influence. So, I would think that you would. Yeah, what is the anarchists used to say? Don't vote; it only encourages them.
Now, Mario, I don't know if Mario wants to be that realistic. So let's hear from him, and then we'll close with some words that endure no matter how much the world turns. Mario.
Well, as to the impression that people may have that I'm pessimistic, I think I'm realistic, but that doesn't mean that I am not hopeful. But what I'm saying is that don't put your hope in democracy. Democracy is an instrument. Democracy is not an end. Democracy is a means to an end. And we don't have pure regime. We have republic, which counterbalance these tendencies that everyone has to choose and pursue their own self-interest through Bill of Rights and what in any constitution is called the dogmatic part of the constitution, which means the baseline established in human right. Is that a perfect instrument? No. The best that we can do given what? Our human condition, which is not, we are not angels, but we are not beasts. We are human with all these tendencies. Yes, there should be a presupposition which come from this ethos, the ethics, and generally speaking, that is being nurtured, it comes from religious traditions. And I think the crisis that we are suffering in the West is everywhere. It's precisely that crisis of meaning. And so then we resort to the political regime to solve all our issues and selfishness and all that. And the system is not for that. So we need to knock the door where we can find some hope. But that hope is not going to come overnight. It's going to take years and years. And that is my point. Take many years. And people who are connected to the social media want to solve their issue with one click. It's like learning, I don't know, Dante, Divine Comedy, what is happening there in just one lesson. No, it takes time.
Yes, the story is told that one day towards the end of the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin came out from the deliberations, and an older lady who, she would have been thrilled to have $3. She's happy to have 3 pence, maybe. She said, "Mr. Franklin, what kind of government do we have?" And Mario, you know his answer, right?
A republic.
If you can keep it.
You can keep it.
If you can keep it.
Just one thing about Ben Franklin. In his autobiography, you find a table of virtues that he claimed he tried to practice every day, 13 virtues, as if he was controlling his own temperament, building his character. And right there you have this list. And at the end, it's very interesting how he was blending the Enlightenment and the Christian tradition. Imitate Socrates, imitate Christ at the end. So how long does it take to resemble?
And on the virtues, and I will come to the end, on the virtues, we have Hume, David Hume, more enlightened than whom there is no one, saying that humility is a monkish virtue. No virtue at all, certainly not for a statesman. And God love him, I don't know, I'd have to refresh my memory. I rather doubt that chastity was on the list of Benjamin Franklin's virtues. And the loss of chastity and the rejection of humility, well, time for repenting. We turn, though, to the gospel for today, and this is from Matthew. Jesus said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which appear beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of dead men's bones and every kind of filth. Even so, on the outside you appear righteous, but inside you are filled with hypocrisy and evil doing. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the memorials of the righteous, and you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have joined them in shedding the prophets' blood. Thus you bear witness against yourselves that you are the children of those who murdered the prophets. Now fill up what your ancestors measured out." Come, Lord Jesus, come. Thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated. See you next week, one way or another. I got a guy from Uganda who's going to join us. Not next week. And I got at least 3 people who are seriously interested. I just wish I could get one of them for next week.
There is one, lieutenant, I think he's not general. He's a retired officer who was in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's a good friend of mine. And he was interviewed about Afghanistan last week and talked at length about very many issues, including politics. And I asked him if he would consider to join us. And he said, yes. Now he's very busy, but he's willing. He's a very interesting guy.
All right. Well, we can be flexible. Yeah. He's probably thinking about these things all the time. He could think with us for an hour.
Yeah.
Particularly,
he's interested in talking about the neoconservative strategy in the Middle East of building democracies.
Mm. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
The mission of Holy Apostles College and Seminary is to form faithful witnesses of Christ. Year after year, the prestigious Newman Guide has recommended Holy Apostles for our academic excellence and steadfast fidelity to the magisterial teachings of the Catholic Church. We are also fully accredited and the leader in Catholic online learning. Our students enjoy the unsurpassed flexibility to study on their own time and anywhere in the world through asynchronous engagement. Holy Apostles is dedicated to the relentless pursuit of truth, which allows students in all academic programs, including undergraduate, graduate, and personal interest, to formulate a coherent worldview based on both faith and reason. The study of the liberal arts, also develops and refines key competencies associated with career readiness, such as critical thinking and problem solving, clear communication, collaboration, and a strong work ethic. The tuition rate at Holy Apostles is one of the most affordable in the country. Yearly tuition for a full-time undergraduate is under $12,000. Students at Holy Apostles can graduate with minimal or even no college debt, which enables them to live out their calling as faithful witnesses of Christ without heavy financial burdens holding them back. Please visit www.holyapostles.edu/admissions for more information. The Fall 2021 admissions deadline is Friday, July 23rd. Classes start Monday, August 30th. See you soon!
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.